Welcome to this webinar put on by Reuters Events, a C-suite take on results-driven technology. This is part of the build-up to the Future of Insurance Virtual Summit that's happening November 16th to 18th, so be sure that you register for that event. There's more information at insurancennexus.com, and of course, when you sign up for this, you will see more information about that event as well. I'm joined today by three great executives who will shed some light on some of the key questions that have come up today. So I will come around to introduce everyone in more detail, but Amy Shore, Jane Pussell, and Scott Drager join us today, and I'll share more of their bios in a moment. But let's talk about what the point of this conversation today is. It's been abundantly clear that only the most innovative, fast-moving, customer-centric carriers will survive. We've all been pressed to see that today more than ever. And what we find is it's not just about, what do you work on, but how do you get to market before anyone else? And that's where the results-driven take on things really matters. And that's why we've assembled the panel we have today, because these are people who are getting results and driving towards them. And that's really what we need to dig into, is not just what to work on, but how and how to get it to market, impacting customers faster than ever. I'm your moderator. I'm Brian Falchuk. I'm the managing partner of Insurance Evolution Partners and the author of The Future of Insurance from Disruption to Evolution. And as I said, joined by our great panel today. I want to kick things off with Jane Pussell, who's going to open things up first with her thoughts. Jane joins us as SVP and CIO for CNA Insurance, where she's responsible for all aspects of the company's technology portfolio. She joined in 2019 from Liberty Mutual, where she served in a variety of roles, both on the business and technology side. And before that, she spent more than 20 years at Accenture, focused on the P&C industry, working with 20 of the top 25 carriers in this space. So Jane, thank you for joining us and for leading things off today.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate that introduction. It is a really interesting topic, and you said it's about getting to market, and it's about figuring out how do you get there before others. And I would tell you that, to me, it really starts with making sure we understand how to prioritize work and how to actually get it executed relatively quickly. So I'm going to open up with some comments and a little bit of background around how are we actually thinking about what to work on and prioritizing it appropriately so that we're actually driving results in the market. Because results driven, it sounds good, right? Who hasn't used that phrase when describing themselves or, potentially what you want out of your technology partners? And being all about results is very easy to say and often much harder to do when making decisions to execute a given initiative or deciding how much to spend on one technology portfolio of work versus another. And then you throw in a completely unexpected situation like the impact from COVID on a business's priorities, and it becomes even more complex. So the classic approach, which we're all familiar with, is a business case, which at least sets the right foundation for people to think about what result we want to achieve in the context of how much it will cost to achieve it. The problem with traditional business cases and funding models is they focus entirely on that idea, and usually only in the context of itself. So I liken it to unfolding a map of an unfamiliar city that you want to live in and looking through a drinking straw at a given neighborhood and trying to decide if you actually want to live there. You might see that there's a park nearby and a river running through it, and it looks good, right? But if when you remove the drinking straw, you see it's next to a water treatment plant and the freeway, you might have a different opinion about it. And how do you know there isn't another neighborhood that's even better given your current interests? You don't. Even comparing one neighborhood to a few others doesn't necessarily provide the assurance that you're making the best selection for the current challenges you have personally, or your family situation and interests that you're trying to address. So fundamentally, traditional business cases, they're better than simply funding projects for those who yell the loudest or have the most influence, but they certainly have their limitations. So what do? How do you make sure that you're picking the right things to work on and getting them to market quickly? So the approach that we are pivoting to at CNA is to start with our business priorities and think about technology spend in terms of investments rather than projects. And as a CIO, I'm in a unique position of discussing the priorities with my business partners and also having a perspective on what our overall portfolio investments look like. So we start with our priorities and then ask ourselves, what's the appropriate percentage of our technology investment pool that makes sense to invest in each priority? And then we match that up with the answer to a very important and frequently so difficult it goes unasked question, which is, if we made progress this year on this priority, how would we know? And what outcome do we think we can actually achieve this year? And as Brian talked about in his opening remarks, it's about getting to market faster. So thinking about multi-year is good, but understanding what results can you drive in the market in a current year is really important. And as I said, that's a very hard question, but it's critically important, and for two reasons. First, it helps our executive team understand what outcomes are they buying with their investment this year. And second, it helps our teams understand what to prioritize within their backlogs that are going to yield the best progress against those measures. So that enables the team to actually make the decisions about what to implement next based on how they're actually moving the needle against those measures and what's going on in the market in a given quarter, whether that's something being delivered by a competitor, a shift in actual market dynamics, something about the economy, or any other factor. It also allows our executive team to understand where our results stand in any given quarter so that we can flexibly adjust at the corporate level our spend, if we need to accommodate any emerging priorities. So having implemented this model before, I can tell you it's a journey. So where do you start? Select a business priority within the organization and identify what are the outcomes we want to see to know we're making progress. So examples include some easy things like increasing quotes or binds by a certain percentage, improving profitability on a given line of business by a certain number of points, having 20% or more of our distribution partner selections driven based on key data that we've made available, or sometimes things a little more difficult and less market facing, like reducing the number of hours of downtime experienced by business users, or how many more hours are our business operations applying to actually executing new business versus servicing accounts and administrative functions. So these things become those outcome or those results that the investment is intended to drive. And then we align a cross-functional team. And that means not just IT resources. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that companies can make when they think about getting things to market quickly. They think about technology projects as technology projects, as opposed to here's the outcome that we want to drive, here are the measures we're going to use, and how do we apply a cross-functional team, including technology, but also the cross-section of the organization who has the focus to move those metrics, and then make sure we're actually looking at them at the end of each quarter. So we're repurposing part of our standing quarterly governance meetings to review those outcomes for each investment area, and to also understand what's the next set of scope that the team will tackle based on their ongoing analysis of what's going to drive the most progress on those metrics. Our executive team still has visibility into the actual work being done, because that's frequently one of the things you hear people say is, well, talking about each individual project helps me understand exactly what's getting done. We can still give that same visibility into what work is being done and what's planned, but this approach takes away the need to defend each individual piece of work in the context of an individual business case. An additional benefit of this approach is it also makes it much easier to fund technology enablers. So technology enablers, what I mean by that is new or evolved technical features that'll make those business outcomes easier to achieve. Some of you may know these items as that extra stuff IT always wants to put into my project but costs too much, so I try to shove as much of it as I can out of scope. Or if you work in a technology organization, you may know these items as those things that never get funded, but at some point will come back to you in the form of a question or a complaint about how old, unstable, or inflexible our technology is. Obviously, I say that facetiously, but the reality is that our new approach makes those items easier to prioritize because we're thinking about them in the context of those overall results we need to drive for a particular priority. So during this transition to investments from projects, we are in parallel continuing that project funding discussion as well. And each quarter, we shift more into the priority investment category and out of individual projects. And we're continuing to allow certainly off-cycle investment decisions to go on to respond in the world of projects. So when you think about getting to market faster on key priorities, this kind of an approach to deciding how to spend money and actually tracking the results in the market gives you a lot more flexibility. If it all sounds hard, it is, but it gets easier to do. And at the end of any given time period, it pays off because you can actually answer the question about what outcome was delivered for the money that we spent or invested. And we can look at it relative to all of the priorities across an organization. So this flexibility makes it much easier to respond to new priorities as they emerge in the market as well. So that's just a little bit about how we're approaching it. Thank you for the opportunity to share these thoughts about our approach, and certainly happy to take any questions about this as part of Q&A.
That was great, Jane. And I like the idea because it is hard that it doesn't have to be all at once right here, right now. It's an evolution. And while we may be smacked from the market with different things that happen in a single moment, like we all have this year, multiple times over, it seems, we can still transition, but the key is to do it. So very tangible. So thank you for that. And I loved your point about taking questions, because that's something I failed to say at the opening, but I will repeat multiple times. You can and should ask questions. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen in Zoom. Please do click there. Ask your questions. You can do that as the conversation's going on. And then at the end of the conversation, Amy will be our final speaker. We'll open it up for Q&A. We'll answer some of those questions and the new ones that come in. So thank you, Jane, very much. Scott, you're up next. So Scott Drager joins us as VP of Customer Transformation for Quadient. He was previously VP of Product Marketing for Quadient, and he focuses on helping customers around the world create omnichannel customer experiences at every stage of the customer journey. He holds an English literature degree, which I'm wondering how many people who are tuned in have this same story, that they ended up in insurance as an accident. Totally normal. And I love that background. And it's one I think resonates with all of us, that, well, I never intended to end up here, but here I am. His career has been focused on helping all of us in the industry communicate better through what we say and also the mediums at our disposal to say it. So Scott, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Brian. And what I want to bring is a perspective to build on what Jane was saying about outcomes and investments. One of the things we care about here is connections, and we believe connections matter. And how that matters for insurance is, we know your customer experiences need to get better, but the key to improving that is to have better employee experiences. So what we're trying to explain to some of the people we haven't met yet is that experiences improve when you collaborate better. So one of the things we've done is we've taken insurance communications and we've elevated it to the level of customer experience. So instead of a series of project-based investments, like Jane was mentioning, we're trying to get a holistic view at communications so you can understand the portfolio of experiences you're creating. So we started out with a customer journey approach. About 5 years ago, we created this so that you can see all of your small customer journeys, from when you have an agent trying to convert a prospect into a customer, you're onboarding that customer through the process, giving them their first policy, their first welcome kits, your employees in the call center, they're having experiences that will help process a claim, answer some questions. But you want to understand that those experiences aren't in a vacuum for the customer. So you may look at it as a project or a piece of technology, but from the customer's view, there's a rich set of context from the first part of the interaction all the way to the end of that interaction. So what we do is we bring previews of all the communications. We actually can help you turn some of these customer experience want list items into tasks for the PMO or your project teams. And then we give you the context, because we believe that collaboration across your organization harmonizes the experiences that you're delivering. So when you look at your personas, put those on a journey map, have Sankey diagrams to understand where your prospects are maybe not converting into customers, so we can have a CX discussion or a sales discussion, integrate those to your systems, and understand that everything you do from a project and technology perspective is going to have a ripple effect when it washes ashore with your customer. And one of the ways to ensure that you're having great experiences is to build trust. And one of the ways to build trust is visual consistency. There's something that we notice a lot of our clients early in the process as we meet them when they're a prospect, they have a moment that we call sign and decline. So your agents and your brokers, they made a sale, they got some nice marketing materials, maybe some extra SMS messages, maybe there's a little bit of online interaction, but as soon as they sign that policy, the experience declines. They go from feeling valued and engaged to receiving things in, 3 columns of text on a page because we want to save postage. So that's one of the things we look at. We have a visual consistency built in so that anything you design, you can see what it looks like on the web, on a piece of paper, in an email, as a notification, a push notification, on the mobile phones, so that you can build that trust continuously across the experience. We know increasingly that experiences are iterative. It's not just the old days where you would send something and then wait for it to get received and then it goes to another team. So we're helping build experiences where a client or a prospect might fill out a form. That form gets sent to be evaluated. It goes through the ratings engine. We automatically can help you create those proposals based off of that. So you're designing an experience to the journey that the customer is on, and not designing a series of disconnected communications. That erodes your customer experience, it erodes your trust in the business. And then completing the journey to see what's next. Once things are complete, you want to make sure that you're getting in that upsell opportunity, get that bundle opportunity in there. So once you complete one customer journey, quickly move to the next one. And we do that with some journey orchestration, journey optimization technology as well. And the way we ultimately do that is we want to help you create customer communications that are personalized, ready to go for every channel so that each channel doesn't have to be its own tech silo. You want to look at communications as part of an experience portfolio and create and design them holistically. You want to make sure your content is developed by people who care about the content. I started out in the IT side, and I would receive content things and just have to implement them. But I didn't know or care about the content at that point. I cared about its adherence to the structure. By breaking this apart, your line of business product owners should be influencing the content, and that content should be able to scale across all the channels. So they only have to do it once, write it once, approve it once, deploy it once, and then the customers can experience it across all channels. And then make sure that this supports your full communication portfolio, policy statements, RPA integrations to facilitate automation of call center items that have become frequent or repetitive, getting those correspondence and letters, both the customer and the employee experience on there. Because if you're on the customer end and you have to listen to an employee who's alt tabbing between 5 screens to complete an interaction, it's no fun for the customer because it's no fun for the employee. So we want to make sure that everybody's engaged for the full range of the customer life cycle. And if you want to check us out, Gartner Peer Insights, we have a 100% propensity to recommend according to the most important people, our customers. So with that, I'll turn it over and wait for any questions in the chat section.
That's great, Scott. I love that point that you just made about connecting the employee experience to the customer experience, because if you see them as separate things, you'll miss one of the biggest impacts on the customer experience, and vice versa. An unhappy customer can lead to disengaged employees. Disengaged employees can drive a lack of happiness or satisfaction or propensity to recommend that you might see from customers. So great point and great build to Amy Shore joining us. And just a reminder, please do put your questions into the Q&A bucket. There's also chat. If you could use Q&A instead, that would be brilliant. Amy joins us. Amy Shore is EVP and Chief Customer Officer for Nationwide and was previously the president of their PNC sales and distribution business. Amy has over 30 years of experience in the PNC industry, including over 20 in various leadership roles across Nationwide, and she served as the executive sponsor for Nationwide's All Women's Associate Resource Group and the national chair of the company's United Way campaign. Amy, thank you so much for joining us.
All right. Well, thank you for having me, and thank you to Jane and Scott for those great remarks. I'm going to take a little bit of a different tactic this morning and start by sharing with the audience a little bit about Nationwide, and then zero in on some of the technologies that we're taking advantage of to really change our business outcomes and drive outcomes. But for the context of Nationwide, I'm going to go to the Wayback Time machine and share with you that we were founded as a mutual insurance company in 1926 by a group of Ohio farmers. And as we move toward our 100th birthday, we are now on the Fortune 100 list and approached $50 billion worth of sales in 2019. And one thing that makes us very unique is to talk about the breadth of solutions that we're able to offer as a company. We serve individuals and families with protection products. We're probably best known for our home and auto, but we also have a financial services company that offers a lot of protection products for individuals and families who are planning for or living in retirement, their life insurance needs, and their long-term care needs, for example. We're also the largest insurer of pets in America. So we have customers with fur, fin, and feathers, as we like to say. We serve businesses as well, and so the breadth of solutions we have on the business side of the house is just as broad from a P&C and financial services perspective. And then, probably not surprising given the heritage of our company, we're the largest insurer of farms and ranches in America. Most of the customers who come to us through an intermediary. So when we talk about the customer, we're really serving to customers and delivering technology solutions to the market that meet the needs of both the intermediary as a customer and the ultimate end consumer who's paying all of our salaries. I would say a common theme, especially since the pandemic, is how we are all accelerating the speed with which we are moving to new technologies and seeing those technologies adopted. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about two specific areas for you today to kind of prime the pump on questions. And one is digital solutions. And obviously this is a big area of focus across almost all industries in America right now. And for us, it's been a significant focus on remote property settlement tools, and the fact that we are now seeing some very significant catastrophe happen in America from a weather and fire perspective, having accelerated the use of these remote property settlement tools really came just in time. The use of drone technologies in both risk management and the assessment of damage, as we look at what has happened with the derecho that recently hit the heartland. We have a very large concentration of business in the state of Iowa, so the use of drones to be able to assess the damage that's happened for our agribusiness and farm customers has been a huge advantage. We've heard a lot in the market about simplified life underwriting and the use of digital technologies to do that. And then lastly, really the new way of communicating and sharing information with customers much faster and much more real time. The other place I wanted to just prime the pump with is to talk about connected technologies. And our biggest advancements in connected technologies have really come through telematics, auto in both personal lines and commercial. And we actually launched our first telematics program for personal auto in 2011, and since then have accumulated over 5 billion miles driven worth of data, either through a device installed in the vehicle, a mobile app, or directly from the connected cars, because we have partnerships with those auto manufacturers. And so we've seen a significant ramp up in the adoption of the telematics programs. Ours are Smart Ride and Smart Miles on the personal side, and we see about a third of our new customers selecting those as options to be able to control their premium more carefully. And then on the commercial side, we launched Vantage 360 for our commercial fleet customers, and it's really one of the most comprehensive telematics solutions in the market, and it's one of the first available in the market that has a mobile feature for monitoring distracted driving that reports immediately back to the business owner. So, and then lastly, from a connected perspective on property, this market's a lot more fragmented, but we are invested in a smart home water security startup called Flow, and we're now offering to our customers the opportunity to control a better control, protecting their homes from the water that we know is a significant cause of damage. So, and the last area I think it's really important to talk about, even though this is a webinar focused on technology, is the investment we're making in our people. We know our culture is really a strong foundation for us, and we are very proud of the culture we've built here. And earlier this year, we launched a 5-year, $160 million investment to reskill and upskill our associates and increase our bonus incentive targets. And so we've called this the future of work. And we're really equipping our associates to increase their own digital literacy and their own capabilities so that we're all ready to be more effective and work with customers in the new way they want to be worked with. So raising the capabilities and the technology skills of our associates is a huge area of focus for us. So that's what I wanted to offer this morning to kind of prime the pump for questions. And I just really appreciate the opportunity to participate.
That's great. Thank you, Amy. And we do have quite a few questions that have already come in. I also have some myself, so I got to see if I pretend like I'm watching and just claim my own questions as someone else's. I do want to start with one from the audience before I pander to myself, but this one comes from Matthew Segal or Siegel. I don't know if I'm butchering your name, but hopefully you know who you are. It says, I'll be interested to hear everyone's thoughts regarding benefit realization, how to best measure the return on these investments or projects. And I think in particular, Jane, you mentioned a number of, we're going for this hit rate, or, something else that's is purely mathematics driven. Or there's an actuarial model you can put in to see what's happened to, say, the quality of a book. But a lot of the things, especially as, Scott, you start talking about communication, Amy, some of the sort of CX kind of things that you were talking about, customer experience things, measuring them can be woollier, for lack of a better word, right? And we can survey and we can see what happens to retention, but is it directly one-to-one? So maybe thinking about how do we measure some of the things we put in place lately that are about a different way of engaging that may not have as explicit a one-to-one, this metric moves in this way kind of relationship. Jane, since you opened the measurement discussion, I might start with you if that's okay.
Sure. So I think there's two ways I think about it. One is we're doing those CX things for a reason, right? We're expecting a business outcome. So I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make is trying to analyze the 18 ways from Sunday that you can think about how do we understand the customer's experience. Now, I'm not suggesting you should take all that off the table. You shouldn't worry anything about like an NPS score, a net promoter score as an example, if that's a metric you choose to use, or surveying for customer feedback. They're important, but to me, they're a subset of what you're trying to accomplish, because I'm driving that customer experience because I want what business outcome. So you're right. I mean, some of those things can be a little bit fuzzier if you just think about the CX measurement aspect of it. But to me, putting it into the context of the business outcome that you're driving, or the customer and employee experience, to Amy's point, right? It's not always just about the customer experience, but it's also understanding the employee experience. You can put those things together in a series of metrics. I really would say it's easy to fall into the trap of, well, this is really hard to measure, so I'm just not going to do it. Or I'm going to use something that's a lot more qualitative than quantitative. And my experience is if you push hard enough through, you can usually find enough quantitative items to really look at and understand. I'd be interested in Amy and Scott's thoughts too.
Yeah, Amy, I saw you came off mute, so I know you've got something to add on this.
Well, and it's the other dilemma that happens here is rarely is only one thing changing at a time in our business. And so perfect attribution is nearly impossible. So at the same time, you may be introducing a new technology, you may have upskilled your associates and encouraged a new behavior, and you also may have launched a new marketing campaign. So if you're closing more sales or you're retaining more customers, can you perfectly attribute the cause of that? I think we have to get comfortable with a close correlation, but not a perfect attribution.
Yeah, that's a good point. And Scott, you're sort of at the forefront of a lot of the things that might be falling into the soft measurement kind of categories on the communication side, or maybe they're prejudiced to believe to be that when they might have harder numbers that can be tracked. What's your take on the question?
what we keep seeing is some frustration inside the insurance companies about what is success, especially when budgets are in play. Because when it's a prospect and not yet an insured, that's a sales and marketing budget. So they get sales and marketing budgets are measured on a different set of quantitative analysis than after the sale. After the sale, it's operations budget. If operations budget is told do more with less every year, they will do more with less, and ultimately that can decrease the customer loyalty. So everybody has to be on the same page in regards to what we're doing with this customer. If you watch it, I agree with Jane, it's difficult, and Amy, that it's difficult to measure as well. But if you put everything on a big map and understand the context, you can get better quantitative information about trends. But you have to watch it. You can't have sales and marketing saying, we got a 14% response rate. It was supported by the commercial. They converted the customers. We're done. And then see customers drift as they drop off because maybe they were getting a poor service.
Yeah. Brian, one additional thought, and to dovetail Amy and Scott's points, it's partly why the investment mindset and the priority outcome is that I'm so passionate about it, because then you're focused on spending a certain amount of money. And Scott's right, when you think about it in functional silos like that, and I've lived that world, multiple organizations, it does become competing priorities versus saying, if we agree this is the priority and we're going to invest money in it, then the desire to hardcore correlate, as Amy said, it starts to dissipate a little bit, because if it's like, well, we're investing and it's cross-functional and we're making progress on the metric, then that should be the definition of success.
Yeah, oh, that's a really good point. Okay, the questions keep flying. Some are going into the chat, so please do put them in the Q&A throughout, so that way we can get to them easier. This is a question, having lived on the insurtech side myself, as well as the carrier side, I've sort of seen both pieces of this problem. It's from Richard Stewart, that there's been an estimated 2,500 plus insurtechs launched. There's probably another 500 since he wrote the question, because it's fast and furious in the insurtech space. But an estimated 2,500 plus in the past couple of years. How do you cut through the sea of offerings and decide who to work with on what issues? And Jane, for me, this also begs that question of technology versus investment. There's a lot to this, is how do you figure this out? And I hear this over and over again from every carrier I talk to. How do you sort out the wheat from the chaff? So we started with you last time, Jane. I'll kick it to Amy first, but let's go around on this one, because I think you all have good perspective on it.
Well, thanks, Brian. And the avenue we went down is we actually have a ventures team who are devoted to, we set up a ventures team and a ventures fund and put a team of experts together to focus on this. So you heard me mention in my opening comments that we are partnered with an organization called Flow. They're a startup that we took not just a partnership with, but also an ownership stake in. And so we actually says, let's set this aside and have a team of experts who can help us do this. And their job is to continuously evaluate these opportunities to see where there's a chance for investment and or a chance for partnership to bring benefit to our customers in a way where we're testing and learning. So that's the tactic we used.
Flow was pretty cool. Also, having had a flood in my house. Wish
Mm-hmm.
they would invent a time machine as well, so we could put that in.
Jane, I've had the ice maker issue myself.
Yeah. Jane, how about yourself?
So in addition to what Amy described, and we have something somewhat similar in terms of a group that reviews those ideas, the other thing that we've done is enable a forum inside of our technology organization to be a bit of a gathering and discussion and sharing type forum. Because what happens that we've seen is someone in the business will end up seeing something and they'll get really excited about it. And we as tech would slow it all down sometimes, not intentionally, but we were trying to figure out where it fit in. So this forum allows us to bring all of these new kinds of ideas forward. And we share it across a broad group of people working on a number of those investments that I talked about. And it helps us say, where does this fit into the investment landscape? And how might it help advance any one of those specific agendas or multiple agendas? Or does it address a pain point that maybe we're not investing in yet, but we want to put it on the list of something that needs to get discussed at the executive level. So how do we take advantage of it? This isn't easy. I mean, I don't think we've solved it yet. We get a lot of these ideas in, as I know everybody does, but that's one of the methods we're using that's certainly helping.
That's great. So what about your perspective seeing across carriers in the industry?
Well, it's definitely a big issue where the business people sometimes say, you know what, I found this $20 per seat per month thing. I'm just going to sign up for it because it's below the budget threshold. And then ultimately, my kids are grown, but when they were, at that 3 to 5 age, they would often, when they would get themselves dressed, they would create an outfit that was all of their favorite pieces of clothing. It was a terrible outfit, but it was all their favorite pieces of clothing. So as you look around, make sure that it fits in with what you're doing and going to those larger metrics like Amy and Jane had mentioned. Otherwise, you just wind up with a really impossible to manage stack of technology that has hundreds of things that cost 20 to 50 or $100 per seat per month. And then it's insane. You can't support a quality employee experience. You're training on new things every day. So understand that the strategy needs to check that and understand the pain points. That's great. Take those suggestions, figure out how to respond to them, but don't let the business sign up for 100 services for $20 per seat per month.
Yeah. Scott, you can stay off mute because I'm going to hit you with the next one because I think you just led into it really well. And it's probably something you guys deal with yourselves. This is from Stephen Applebaum, who talked about the balance between the low-hanging fruit and the bigger strategic, longer-term sort of foundational transformation, and specifically in the context of customer experience. For those of you who know Franklin Covey, they talk about the whirlwind versus the strategic, and the strategic will always lose out to the whirlwind of what fire's erupting in front of you. You've got lots of stuff you have to do, and it pops up, and you have to take care of it. As a provider yourself, Scott, having to invest in lots of different things about your technology and enhancements can take away from your ability to develop or deliver on that long-term evolution. So I imagine you guys yourselves would have this trade-off. And then for the carriers represented here, thinking about all those little things you have to do now that are valuable. And if you just do that, how do you get to the long term? But if you just do the long term, you never get to do the small projects. And that balance is really tricky to strike. So Scott, maybe you can give us some views from Quadient.
Sure. We dedicate a certain percentage of our research and development effort towards future focused items. So we create teams to start that. And we were able to do that successfully on a number of occasions. Back in like 2013, when I joined the company, we noticed that there was new types of collaboration. So more people within the insurance company were being invited to the table to design customer-facing communications. Then we started looking at us versus the industry, and us and the rest of the industry at the time had a pretty terrible set of disjointed interfaces. So we said, well, if all these people are starting to collaborate, we need to get them interfaces that look the same and harmonize so that they can have better discussions. That led to us saying, well, what else is going on? There was a lot of customer or chief digital officer, customer communication officer, chief customer officers showing up. So we said, well, what do they need? They need to have customer journey mapping so that they can stay on the same page, because they don't understand that their project mix is complicated. And then most recently, we just had a partnership where we OEM some journey optimization technology and created a way for people to really track each individual customer. So we followed the collaboration. It pushed us to a macro view, which then pivoted to a micro view. So we're able to do all of it. But that was by listening and just making sure that we are spending that future focused communication.
No, I'm stuck on mute. Sorry about that. Jane, how about yourself? And I imagine you must see this a lot in your role, the conflict between the long term and the short term.
Certainly. And it's actually one of the things that I've been most impressed about the folks that work in technology at CNA and have, because it's one of the number one questions they raise to me as something they need leadership help with is, how do we make sure we have enough investment in the long term balanced against that market delivery need that's kind of ongoing? And it is partially why, and I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but it is partially what Scott said at the beginning about just understanding that you're going to have to do both, and therefore you have to plan to do both, right? It doesn't just happen. And it takes executive alignment to say, okay, well, how much, like as an example, how much money are we going to spend evolving our underlying technology platforms, right? How much of it can we do in the context of a business priority that's there? And do we need to make an explicit set of investments to just move the ball forward on that technology evolution underneath the covers, right? So it becomes, and it's much easier to understand that landscape if I can say I'm taking a top-down view of the investments we're making instead of a project up view, right? Project till the bucket's full, and then you go, oh shoot, I don't have any left to fund that thing. I guess that'll have to wait till the next funding becomes available. So that's how we've been managing it. I certainly do see it a lot. It's something that my employees are very passionate about, which is great because that's how we get better tech and good customer service. So it's definitely something we're working on, but that's one of the ways we're approaching it, I think helps.
Yeah, I see that fitting right into your initial comments about investment versus project. You end up spending everything on all those little favorite pieces of your outfit, perhaps. Amy, how about yourself with Nationwide?
Well, we are in a unique position here that we are in the process of actually replacing all of our underlying policy administration systems, all those legacy systems. You know, as a mutual, without having the pressure of reporting quarterly stock earnings, it's a little easier for us to make those big investments for the long haul. So we are nearly complete on the personal line side, well underway in the commercial line side, well underway in the life insurance space, for example, of replacing those systems that were, 30 to 40 years old with modern underlying systems that then enable all of the other kinds of technologies that we want to be able to use. So we have been feeling that pain. Now what the reverse pain is, now you have a big chunk of your investment in long term, and some of the things you'd really like to do in the short term can suffer. So there's a reverse balance that happens there. But we are definitely seeing that once you get through that, you're really glad to be in the new position because of what that new underlying technology enables to happen much faster.
That's yeah, I mean, that's the struggle that we're all in. So it's great that you guys are on the bigger journey and still recognizing the need for the shorter term aspects as well. It's a balance, and it has to be a purposeful decision to keep that balance. This is another great question that I think is hyper timely for all of us as we talk about innovation and still lots of people being remote and digital. This is from Satya Sitaraman, and I hope I'm saying that correctly, but he asks, what is your point of view on leveraging digital workforce in transformation programs? And you think about a team room or a bunch of people coming together for those meetings, and that's not happening as much anymore. And maybe it will again in a few months, or maybe for some it's happening now, but for others it could be quite a bit longer, or that's just not how you're going to work going forward. So how do we think about digital interactions in work that often was very much people together, especially the move towards agile? It is more about, the stand-ups and coming together on everything. How do we make that work? Jane, from the CIO's perspective, what's your take on that?
It's one of the number one things that we're focused on right now is how do we continue to offer more of those digital collaboration suites, and looking at it in the context of what are we trying to use it for. So my business partners that, our brokers that, or excuse me, our distribution people that are working directly with brokers, they need a very different collaboration solution than my teams that are working on, for example, some of those transformation type programs. And it's easy to fall in love with one or the other and get super excited about some of the brand new tech. So I think they're critically important. I think they will stay important even when people return to the office. I don't envision us going back to a world where we won't have some teams that are virtual. I think the use of video and the collaboration tooling is going to be very important. And by collaboration tooling, I don't just mean this kind of tooling. I mean virtual whiteboards, virtual Kanban boards, right? The rooms where you can actually share those things easily. Because, let's be honest, Skype for Business has a whiteboard. But it's certainly, when I look at some of the other ones that are out there that we've been testing internally, that there are many really great options. So I think it's going to stay important, and we're trying to balance that with how do we make sure that we're thinking about all the places that we need those collaboration solutions, not just inside technology delivery projects, as an example.
Scott, how about yourself?
Well, we've been seeing this. We've been learning for 2 decades with our professional services team, understanding some of the frustrations of collaboration, and we've been doing that remote. But some of the ways we've attacked the problem is we put some of the journey mapping, we put that up in the cloud right away. That was a cloud first product for us. But then as we were doing that, we learned that just having something disconnected in the cloud was good for planning at the macro level, but that plan wasn't executing very well. So we did some integration to Jira for project management offices to make sure that what is the vision gets translated into tasks, and those tasks can go back on the map. And then the same with the designers and the integrators, they needed to collaborate. So we put in a secure connection so that people can make a comment on the cloud. Maybe they're a web-based product owner. All of this communication is done with a kind of like a Slack channel that follows the project so that you don't lose it. Because one of the things we saw was people were doing their work, they were losing context and having trouble coming back to it. So getting people back on the page, letting them split up effectively, and then bringing them together, split up, come back together, and divide labor to facilitate collaboration. Kind of like one of those Toyota factories where anybody can pull the line to stop it. It's easier when everybody can visually see what's going on rather than forcing people down a checklist. So we try and work for quants, for left brain, right brain people, make sure everybody can collaborate effectively.
It's definitely different, and it's probably a journey and an adjustment period. But there are, as you say, there are a lot of tools out there, some better than others, and some better in some situations, or for some people, or more natural for them than others. But there are ways to try to bridge that gap. Amy, what about it nationwide? What have you been able to do? And maybe not just in technology, but in some of your other teams trying to move the customer experience forward?
Yes. So I would share the example, to not be redundant with Scott and Jane. I would share the example that we are getting ready to launch a virtual customer experience room. This may have been something in the past where we would actually physically set up a room and let employees come and have the opportunity to walk through the journey of the customer. And we're now moving that to be a virtual customer experience room. It probably should have been the way we were doing it all along, because now you're making it available to 27,000 employees instead of those who just can physically get to the room. But that's an example of how to bring the customer journey to life in a different way for us. And then obviously, like you heard from Jane, we've got different collaboration tools in place. And this isn't an advertisement for Microsoft, but we are in the process of conversion to Microsoft Teams. And I will tell you that even old fogies like me have adapted to and when I had a meeting earlier today that was a conference call that I had to dial in and enter the PIN, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this feels so archaic. Why? I'm actually using a phone and dialing a phone number to have an interaction with somebody. So I think we've all grown and developed, and these new tools are working great. So.
Yeah, I think a lot of us have had to make the shift. I think I live in Zoom, and wasn't that long ago that it's like, oh, a Zoom call is the worst thing. I mean, I might still get Zoom exhaustion, but at least I know how to use it now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so this comes from an anonymous person, so at least I can pronounce that safely. Um, Jane, it was directed at you, but I think this clearly would apply to everyone. And it's on the same subject of collaboration, more specifically cross-functional. And that can be about actual working on things, or it could be about coming up with ideas and contributing to moving the organization as a whole forward, even if those ideas don't necessarily have anything to do with your day job. How do we get more of that? People contributing to and engaging in things that aren't necessarily just about their own desk or their boss's desk. When that's historically been the focus, you had your incentives aligned to what your unit is doing, you had your deliverables, you had your day job, all things that really kept you in the silo. versus trying to be more cross-functional and cross-organization at a time when we're even brought to a more individual setting, working at home for a lot of people?
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question because I think that sometimes, we've all seen in a waterfall delivery project, for example, when we're finally ready to release and we decide to start training everybody in the field, or, as an example, people go, "What in the world is this? Like, who designed this thing, right? Who thought that was a good way to do this process?" That's like the worst possible outcome you can have, because if your employees are thinking that, the customers that they're most familiar with are going to be thinking the same thing. So, honestly, I don't know that we've cracked the one standard way to make that happen, to bring, the right people in at exactly the right time. We're still working on it. If I went back to some of my experiences with Liberty Mutual, I would say we started early on. As soon as we had sort of, this is the investment we want to make and these are the outcomes, we said, who are some of the folks that are directly involved with the solution? If it's an employee that's using the solution, if it's an underwriter that's, underwriting a piece of business, someone in distribution, et cetera. And we started identifying those people very early on, and then bringing a few of them into the demos that the teams were doing of the solutions. It had the added benefit, candidly, of us saying, hey, we'd love to go out to market with this minimally viable product, right? But the old thinking always was, well, but our underwriters are going to hate that. They'll never use it. They'll never accept it. They're going to yell at us for it. Well, it turns out if you bring them in earlier in the discussion and they actually have input to something, they might say, I'd actually love to get that thing. And if that means I have to do this other part manually for a bit until you get that done, great. So we got much better progress towards actual MVPs in market when we brought in the frontline users, whomever those people were. I think a lot of times it's easy to make the mistake that it has to be only customers. And Amy, I'm super impressed with that customer journey room, because I do think that's an important thing to give your employees exposure to. But I also think it's important to remember that sometimes our employees are the users, and therefore bringing them in those demos, we just ended up with much, much better solutions.
Yeah. That's great to hear. You're also priming the next question, but I won't give that away. Scott, what are your thoughts on the subject as well?
Yeah, we see a variety of approaches on this one. The leaders are balancing their stakeholders versus their technical teams very well. And they don't rush out to market. But the important thing is, what we see is collaboration in the RFP process. Because like you were a vendor, so we see a lot of RFPs. A red flag for us is when there's too few people in the response. So a new trend that we've noticed is, instead of having 4 or 5 people in some of those initial meetings where somebody's ticking off technical boxes, we try to invite 7 to 10. One time we even had 15 people in one of those first meetings. And we had an amazing kind of light bulb moment at one of our clients over in Ohio. They said, wait a second, I have to approve this thing 9 times right now. You're saying this, we can just do this once? And this was a stakeholder that wasn't even close to making the cut for that first meeting, because the problems aren't understood. All of the problems aren't understood across the organization unless you get everybody in the room. So as Jane mentioned, like, you could save one person a little bit of time, but it might have a huge externality in another part of the time. You know who hates that the most? Compliance. Getting approval from the compliance team 6 times in a really complicated and archaic way, that's going to mean they're not going to use your system, which is going to make your initiative fail.
That's a good point. So thinking about digital processes and ways to bring people together, we've been talking about that from the EX side, the employee side, and to Scott's point earlier about connecting that with the customer experience. I've had a few questions, 2 in particular that stood out that I think interplay. One is from David Turner and the other is from Varun Munjal about the digital offering out. And so for Varun, it was about digital only products. For David, it was more about the digital interactions to deliver products, whether they're digital or traditional. And I wonder if we only have a few minutes left, but I'd love to hear, are you seeing a move in acceptance from the customer side around transacting digitally, a rise of those digital alternative channels? And what are the thoughts on purely digital products. Amy, yourself, because you have both the distribution background and the customer facing background today.
Sure. So I would say we are seeing the appetite and the adoption accelerate rapidly. I used the example in my opening remarks about our remote property settlement tools. In the claims space, we are seeing the adoption of something as simple as two-way texting with the customer throughout the claims process. We have what I would call a pizza tracker for where are you in the process of your claim, and the adoption of that is very strong. We're seeing a significant increase in the adoption of mobile apps from customers to get access to information. And in our retirement plan space, for example, when all of the turmoil occurred in the market and the CARES Act was passed, those folks had a lot of questions. So we saw a lot of adoption in that space, both from our associates and from the end customers. And then as you think about the intermediaries as well, they want us to deliver a really good experience to their customers, but we're also offering digital solutions to those intermediaries. On our personal auto and home, we have a very simple digital process to get a quote and bind completed in about 3 minutes for a home and auto both. And we're seeing really strong adoption there. So the appetite is there if the product works, and then the experience they have after that process works as well.
If it works, that's a great point. And I think kudos to the industry that it is pretty broad now, the fast quote and bind. I think that's something we've been working on for a while and have done well on, despite the views that insurance is slow. There's some things we actually do very quickly and very easily today. So a great example of that. And Jane, how about yourself? Seeing a different mix of lines primarily as well.
Yeah, CNA primarily works in the commercial and specialty type space, and certainly we've seen the adoption of digital in the small business space for a while, right? Because frequently most small business owners operate much more like a personal lines buyer at that point, and they're more comfortable with digital solutions. However, as long as they can continue to have the advice portion, we done a lot of research to understand that they still want the advisory portion of it. I would say what's been fascinating and accelerated by the current environment is the adoption of a digital ecosystem in the middle market space, and even up into some of the much larger spaces. That's a trend I think everyone thought would come at some stage of the game, and certainly we've seen program and panel type business driving some of that, but the request for just significantly more digital integration and digital experiences for a distribution partner and the end customer, to Amy's point, it's gone through the roof in the last 6-9 months, especially.
Yeah, oh, I can imagine. And it's 6 or 9 months. It's been a while, right? We're starting to see these things catch on. Scott, final comments from you, from Quadient's perspective.
Yeah, the time scale is important. One of the things we've learned from, especially the CARES Act, is you as an insurer maybe thought you had 6 months, 90 days, 30 days to implement a change to some policy language. Nope, if Congress wants to do something pretty quickly, you may have 1 week to change that messaging. So all of the legacy systems that stop that are a barrier. So one of the things that both Jane and Amy had mentioned was agility for the organization is not only a good idea, it's about to become mandated more frequently. So build a system that can be reactive. Then you can support a digital only product. You can support mixed products, but the organization has to be flexible and ready to change big things in less than 48 hours.
Yeah, the timescales are completely different. And the worst thing is no one knows what day it is or how long anything's been. So we all have to stay on top of that. Thank you, all three of you. Fantastic insights. And we had a lot of questions come in. We only touched the surface on them, but we actually got through a lot of them. We had a great discussion. I really appreciate the perspective from Nationwide, from CNA, from Quadient, and Quadient adding that sort of cross-industry view because of all the different carriers you get to see. Incredibly valuable. For anyone who didn't catch at the beginning, this webinar, and there will be many more leading up to it, is part of the series in support of the Future of Insurance USA virtual event happening November 16th through 18th, where you will get insights like this and many, many more from literally the top people, top minds in the industry. So incredibly valuable. I pulled a lot from this conversation. Thank you, all three of you, and to everyone who attended, taking an hour of your day. I hope that this was valuable. Thank you, everyone, so much.
Brian.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Brian, Amy, Jay.